What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. We'll be going over some wide receivers and tight ends to trade for in today's video. There weren't that many buy lows for wide receiver this week. I didn't find too many guys that are like mispriced in the trade market, but there are a few tight ends I wanted to talk about, and since we don't usually get to talk about tight end, figured we'd throw them into this video since it's still very important to have a solid option at tight end. So we'll do that. We'll go over, I believe it's 2 wide receivers, and then a group of wide receivers, and then a few different tight ends we'll talk about. But if you want a more complete list that also includes running back, you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. So let's get things started off with the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was through Sunday, we saw 2 running backs inside the top 15 on the week to not score a touchdown. One was Alvin Kamara. I asked who the other one was, and the answer is our boy, Chase Edmonds. And Nile Sachdeva, again, 2 days in a row, gets that one right. You guys are going to need to put on push notifications if you want to beat him. Today's stat, Kyler Murray, Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady lead all quarterbacks in red zone fantasy points through week 7. Who ranks 4th? All right, we'll do wide receivers first, and the first guy we'll talk about is still the top trade option, just like it was last week, and it's Allen Robinson. He now ranks 6th in targets, 8th in air yards, but he's only 25th in fantasy points per game. He's coming off 5 for 53 and no touchdowns in week 6, and then 4 for 70 last week. The thing is, we knew he was going to struggle this last week, and we knew going into this stretch it was going to be rough. He had 4 brutal matchups in a row, taking on Ramsey this past week. I literally said in the Saturday video that he, along with the Cowboys receivers, are ones I would bench this week. I said that the best case scenario we're looking at with Allen Robinson, unless he gets insanely lucky, I thought was 4 for 60. He went 4 for 70, so it showed me up. But the point is, really difficult matchup. We see even in other tough matchups, he was getting like 9, 10, 12 targets. He's had some spike targets. Even beyond that, they knew going into this week, they're not going to be able to use Allen Robinson. He caught all of his 4 targets. Those are the only times they even really looked at him. Basically every play it was like, well, Ramsey's got him, so I'm going to try and find something else. Of course, it didn't work. They had like 3 points offensively. The 10 points was only from the fumble recovery touchdown. But the point is, it was a brutal matchup, so shouldn't have expected him to do very well. And if we look at the 3 games before that, brutal too. Colts, Bucks, Panthers, and then of course the Rams last week. Those teams rank 13th, 8th, 6th, and 2nd in fewest fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Yet despite this, over this stretch of time, he's still averaging like 12.6 fantasy points per game, which, you know, isn't crazy high, but for having just 1 touchdown, that's pretty good. You know, thanks to his massive target share, he's able to get into 12.6 fantasy points per game. Of course, half PPR scoring, like I always use. I know Nick Foles has been trash, but anyone getting this sort of volume and still producing in brutal matchups is someone we need to be trading for. Now, remember what I said last week. I said he has 2 brutal matchups in a row. He does face the Saints this week. He did have 10 for 87 and a touchdown against them last year, but this is still a negative matchup for wide receivers. I still think he's going to perform well. I don't think you need to bench him this week like you kind of did last week, but it's still not a great matchup. But after this week, he's going to crush. He closes the season facing Titans, Vikings, Packers, Lions, Texans, Vikings again, and then Jaguars. Those are very, very bad pass defenses, and so I would not be shocked if you're looking at this in like 2 months and you're like, oh my goodness, Allen Robinson is a top 5 receiver every single week. He's not going to cost you even close to that right now, so go and get him before he explodes. Another receiver I'd trade for is someone that I genuinely don't remember the last time I have mentioned, and that's DJ Chark. I mean, I have not talked about him, I feel like, since the summer. Maybe I've mentioned him in like a news video, maybe when he was injured for a little bit, but like, I don't know. I don't really remember the last time I talked about him, but it's probably because he hasn't been that great in fantasy recently. He's got 3 receptions for 16 yards a few weeks ago, then 7 for 45 2 weeks ago, and then 1 for 26 this last week. He now ranks 38th in targets per game, 18th in air yards per game, but only 43rd in fantasy points per game. Chark actually has 21 targets over these last 2 weeks, And he's very clearly the top option in the passing game when he's healthy. He and Minshew just haven't really been able to connect all that much in the past 2 weeks, which is kind of crazy because remember when he started the season, it was incredible how often they were connecting. I mean, he had 18 receptions on 20 targets through the first 5 weeks, which is crazy efficient. But then we go to these last 2 weeks and he's only caught 8 of 21 targets. So I think somewhere in the middle, right? He's not going to catch 90% of his targets over time, but he's also not going to catch 8 of 21 over time. It'll be something in the middle, and so his production is going to improve from what we've seen these last 2 weeks. He's not going to average 3.4 yards per target moving forward. He is a guy who's going to have, I promise, at some point this season, he's going to have a blow-up game. It's how they use him. They use him a decent amount in overall targets, but they also do use him deep downfield where they like to attack on big plays. The one concern, if you want to talk about a concern, is Laviska Shenault. I do think, I thought going into the season, I didn't know. I really just couldn't figure out if Laviska was going to be that great. But watching him play, I do think Laviska Shenault is a talented receiver. He's going to be a very good receiver in this league, and they want to use him. They want to scheme him looks. But I really don't think Laviska is a huge threat to the workload of Chark. Chark is still going to, when everyone is healthy, lead the team in targets, lead the team in air yards, just be the guy they want to get the ball downfield, and that's what we want in fantasy. And so I think his production is going to improve as we move forward. I think you can consider him like a low-end 2, someone you'd prefer to use in the flex. These are the type of players we use in the flex, when they have monster weekly ceilings. We're okay taking a little bit of that floor, taking on that floor as some risk. But I really think if you can use him in the flex moving forward, I would do that. And I think that he's going to be pretty cheap, especially coming off this, 1 reception on 7 targets. And then, he had like 12 targets 2 weeks ago, and he only had 45 yards from it. So he's definitely underperforming, but it's not the talent. It's not Minshew. I don't really think Minshew's not that great. But I don't think it's this duo. I just think it's randomness. And I think the randomness will shift in his favor moving forward. So trade for him now. I also want to mention just like the usual suspects, these guys that I mentioned in a lot of these trade videos because they have been getting a bit unlucky or they have been having some pretty difficult matchups, and that's Marquise Brown, Jerry Jeudy, and then Darius Slayton. They all still remain values given that their opportunity is outweighing their production right now, and all 3 are coming off fairly mediocre stretches. Jeudy is by far the cheapest of the 3, and he's someone that I would target more in deeper formats. I don't think you're building a championship team in a 10 or 12 team league with Jerry Jeudy, right? And so I don't really want to be super aggressive in targeting him in those formats. But in a 14 team league or a 16 team league, he's a really, really nice player to go after because we see normally, we've had a few rookies crush early this season, but normally it's more the second half of the season. And Jeudy was, without question, a top 2 talent in this draft. It was CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy. There was a lot of debate over who was better, but those were the 2 best receivers. And given that, we see Locke miss a little bit of time, and then when Locke comes back, they have some tough matchups, and he was still a rookie in the first half of the season, things haven't really gone his way, but he's going to be so cheap in the trade market right now, and he has so much talent. And Locke is a guy who is not afraid to just chuck the ball downfield. They're going to have some really big weeks in the second half. I think, again, 14 and 16 team leagues, I think you have to be going over Jerry Jeudy because his value is only going up. Slayton would be a step up from Jeudy, and I think you can target him in 10 and 12 team leagues as a guy that you can use in the flex every week. He's going to be out there in nearly every snap, and while his floor is a little bit lower, like I said, in the flex spot, I'm okay taking on a lower floor if it gives me, 150 and 2 touchdown upside, which absolutely, I don't even care the matchup Slayton basically has, unless he's, facing off against Ramsey. He's got that upside every single week. I want him. And then finally, Marquise Brown. He has been greatly underperforming this season, but he still ranks 6th in air yards per game, but only 46th in fantasy points per game. I'm telling you, this Ravens offense has been underperforming. They are going to improve. This passing offense in particular is going to get a little bit better at some point this season. And given that Andrews and Hollywood are just the entire passing offense, basically. I mean, they scheme almost everything in the passing game to these two. I think that these guys are two that you really want to be going after in the trade market. I'm not including Mark Andrews right now in the trade video. I think there are other tight ends I would rather go after because their value is a little bit lower than what they should be producing. But I think Marquise Brown, absolutely, you've got to be trying to get him because he's going to be much more valuable than he has been in the second half of the season. That's kind of it for wide receiver, though. There's no one else that really grades out as this huge value, but there are some really decent options at tight end, so I do really want to go over that today. My favorite tight end to trade for this week is Hunter Henry. He's now 5th in targets per game, 3rd in air yards per game, but 19th in fantasy points per game, thanks to just 1 touchdown on the season. But the thing is, that's really unexpected. I mean, Herbert looks incredible, and the Chargers should be considered an above-average passing offense at this point. So you would think that the tight end in this offense, who has only 1 game below 7 targets, would easily be a tight end 1. But again, he's the tight end 19 in points per game. And I don't know if I said the tight end 1, a tight end 1. You would think that someone as talented as Hunter Henry, with an offense that has been producing as well as the Chargers have, you'd think that, that's easy. He's getting, at least 7 targets in almost every single week. Yeah, he's a tight end 1. It doesn't take that much to be a tight end 1. Tight end 19 in points per game. He's only gained 28 receiving yards per game over the last 3 weeks. But again, the fact is, he's out there. Whenever they're passing the ball, he's on the field. The offense is good. He himself is incredibly talented. So given that tight end is genuinely a wasteland, aside from like the top few guys, he should be considered a tight end 1 moving forward. But he's not been producing like that, and so I think you can get him pretty cheap, and so I would do that. Also, icing on the cake, dude's already had his bye, and so you're not going to need to find a replacement for him. Tight end can be very, very annoying to find a replacement for because you don't usually keep backup tight ends, and so you have to bench Hunter Henry, like when he's going on bye, bench him, drop a player you like off your bench, add in some scrub tight end. You probably got like 4 points. Now you're frustrated, and it's just a mess. Go get yourself some Hunter Henry. You don't have to deal with that. Just put him in the starting lineup every week. Another player you can also do that for, because they've also had their bye, is Mike Gesicki. And I'm very excited about the potential for Gesicki. Is he going to go off in the second half? I don't know. He might not. But I really think the opportunity is there. He's 19th in targets per game, but 4th in air yards per game, and only 17th in fantasy points per game. Coming off a goose egg. 0 receptions. I really needed him to do more than 0 receptions. That was frustrating. But here's the thing. Unless you've been living under a rock, you know that the Dolphins have decided to transition into Tua this week. And however you feel about that, this clearly means that they have seen enough in practice that we should have confidence this offense is not going to fall apart. Because while they haven't been elite, like this has been a pretty solid offense. Miami ranks 17th in both passing yards per game and points per game, and they're 3-3 on the season. And as they exit their bye, you're looking at this like, I mean, they could make the playoffs. Like, will they? I don't know. Like, I think it's still going to be an uphill battle for them to make the playoffs, but they could absolutely make the playoffs. And so they're not making this move if Tua hasn't been really good in practice and he's not good to go from the injury. Like, he's the future of this franchise. They're not going to rush him in when, like I said, they're producing pretty well on offense and they're 3-3 and they're in the playoff race. Like, he's clearly been doing very, very good in practice. So what does that mean for fantasy? Well, we can't entirely know, right? Like, when you have a new quarterback, guys just favor different players. Like, could Preston Williams all of a sudden be relevant? Maybe. Could Parker just start exploding? Maybe. But I really think this helps Gesicki because Ryan Fitzpatrick has historically favored wide receivers over tight ends, and we kind of saw that play out this year. Like, Gesicki's been out there a ton. He's running a ton of routes. The air yards are there, but he has gone through a ton of stretches where it just seems like Fitzpatrick refuses to use him. And although we can't know for sure who Tua is going to favor, it is absolutely possible that Mike Gesicki is a guy he leans on. He is a physical freak. He's exceptional in the receiving game, and we have seen plenty of times that rookie quarterbacks will lean on the tight end position. And when you have someone as talented as Mike, I mean, it's pretty easy to lean on him. Like, he's not leaning on some scrub. He's leaning on a very, very good tight end. So I just think the upside is just there for Mike Gesicki. And when you want to look for someone who's a buy low, you look for someone who just had 2 targets and 0 receptions and then went on bye. They've seen 2 zeros in a row, the Mike Gesicki owners have. So I really think if you need to upgrade at tight end, it's Hunter Henry and it's Mike Gesicki. 2 guys I'd go after. I want to close by reminding you that Kelce and Kittle are always guys you should be looking to trade for. I don't really care how good your team is. You know, it's like Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki. I think they're going to be really good. I think they're great values. But if you want a true difference maker, it's Kelce and it's Kittle. You know, it's always a good idea to just try and get those 2 on your team. They just set your team apart so much, and their ceiling is just so much higher than all of the other tight ends. And they actually have really nice schedules in the fantasy playoffs. So Kelce has one kind of tough matchup against the Dolphins, but then he faces, you know, the 2 worst defenses against the tight end position in the semifinals and the finals. So that's something to look forward to. And then we see in the final 3 weeks, Kittle faces 2 below average pass defenses against tight ends, and then he takes on Arizona, who is technically strong against tight ends, but it's a game that should shoot out. We would kind of think it's going to be a very important game for the playoffs, and so these teams are going to rely on their best players. And let's be honest, does matchup really matter with Kittle? I mean, you're playing Kittle every week. I know that last week was probably the worst matchup for him because that's who the Patriots are obviously going to try and take away, and he still did fine for a tight end, but it doesn't matter. Like, even if you're going up against a difficult defense, George Kittle can have 10 for 150 and 3 touchdowns against literally anyone. And so whenever these guys are coming off of a mediocre week, I mean, both of them had pretty below average performances, you just have to send something. It doesn't matter if it doesn't go through. I think you just have to send an offer to say that you've sent an offer and you have tried, because getting these guys on your team is such a big difference maker. So those are some wide receivers and tight ends that you should be trading for this week. If you want a complete list of all players to trade for, you can check that out at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. And if you did, then how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? Thanks for watching.